When we hired her, we never suspected a thing. She came highly recommended by a friend of a friend, someone who claimed she was the perfect babysitter, responsible, trustworthy, and, most importantly, good with kids. At first glance, she was exactly what we needed. Young, polite, and smiling, she exuded warmth and calmness. I remember the first time she walked through our door, her eyes locking with mine as she introduced herself with a firm handshake. It was the kind of greeting that made you feel like everything was going to be okay. The way she spoke about kids, how she related to my daughter, Lucy, and how she seemed to understand the balance between playing and setting boundaries. It was almost too good to be true. But I didn't question it. I should have. We were just looking for someone reliable, someone who could watch over Lucy while my wife and I went out for a rare night alone. The babysitter, her name was Rachel, checked all the boxes. Everything about her seemed perfect. She was the ideal candidate, or so it seemed. As I handed over the keys and showed her around our home, she nodded politely, asking all the right questions about bedtime routines, favorite games, allergies, the usual things you'd expect from someone who cared about doing their job well. It was a Friday evening when we first left the house with Rachel in charge. The plan was simple: a dinner and a movie, a chance for my wife and me to reconnect after a busy few months. We barely discussed our worries. After all, we had nothing to worry about, right? The babysitter was here, and we were going to enjoy our rare break. Little did we know, that evening would mark the start of something much darker. The evening started off uneventfully, almost too uneventfully. When we left the house, Rachel had already settled in with Lucy, sitting down to play a board game. The way they were chatting, laughing, the way Rachel bent down to Lucy's level, it all seemed so natural. It made me feel at ease, which was exactly what I needed. But as we sat in the restaurant, something nagged at me. The unease wasn't about the babysitter herself. It was something I couldn't put my finger on. Perhaps it was the quietness in the house when we left. No shouting, no sound of the television, no background noise that usually filled our home. But that was just a fleeting thought. The first sign that something wasn't right came when we received a text from Rachel. It wasn't strange in itself, but the message was unusual. Everything's going great. Lucy's having so much fun. We're watching her favorite show now. Nothing about it raised any alarms. But as I sat there, I wondered why she'd mentioned the show. It wasn't that Lucy wasn't allowed to watch TV. It was just that Rachel had told me they'd planned to do something else that evening. But then again, I shook it off. Maybe she just had a change of plans. We enjoyed our night out, laughing and talking like we hadn't in weeks. But when we returned home, the front porch light was still on, which was odd because we always turned it off when we left. It was one of those small details you don't think about at first, but that later linger in your mind, like the smell of something burning in the kitchen when you step into a room. The door creaked open, and there, sitting on the couch, was Rachel. But where was Lucy? The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Usually, when we came home, Lucy would be bouncing up and down, excited to tell us all about her night. But there was nothing. Just Rachel sitting alone in the dimly lit living room, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to mask the sudden unease growing in my chest. "Oh, everything's great," Rachel replied, her voice a little too calm. "Lucy's fast asleep, actually. She was exhausted after her game, and we just tucked her in. I think she'll sleep through the night." I couldn't help but feel a twinge of concern. Lucy never went down that easily. She was a lively, energetic child who usually resisted bedtime until the last minute, always asking for one more story or another glass of water. But Rachel's assurance put me at ease, or so I thought. We thanked her, paid her for the evening, and she left quietly, offering a warm smile as she exited. But as the door shut behind her, the house felt colder. Something wasn't right. Lucy was always full of life. Always. Yet there was an eerie stillness in the air that I couldn't shake. I walked toward Lucy's room, slowly, almost hesitantly. I had no reason to be worried, I told myself. But the pit in my stomach told a different story. I reached for the doorknob. When I opened it, Lucy was lying still in bed, her eyes closed. But there was something wrong. Her blankets were unusually tucked in tight, almost as if someone had deliberately positioned them that way. Too tightly, too precisely. I stepped closer to her bed. The soft sound of her breathing reassured me, but my eyes couldn't help but fixate on the oddness of her posture. Her head was tilted at an odd angle, her hands pressed under the covers, stiff. I sat down next to her, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead, but as I touched her, I froze. Her skin was colder than I expected. Her cheeks, normally warm and flushed with life, felt oddly pale. "Lucy," I whispered, bending closer to her. "Lucy, honey." She didn't stir. At that moment, a cold wave of dread washed over me. For a moment, I couldn't move. It was as if time had slowed down and my body was frozen in place. I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't figure out what. I gently placed my hand on Lucy's forehead, hoping to feel the familiar warmth of her skin. But it wasn't there. The coldness sent a shiver down my spine. It was as though the life that once filled her was somehow absent. My heart raced, and my mind spun with questions I couldn't answer. What had Rachel done to her? I stood there, staring at Lucy's peaceful face, fighting the panic threatening to overwhelm me. It wasn't normal. Lucy was never this still. She was always so full of energy, bouncing around with endless questions or sudden bursts of laughter. I brushed her cheek with my fingertips, trying to rouse her, but she didn't respond. My mind immediately jumped to the worst-case scenarios. Was she sick? Had something happened to her during the evening? With trembling hands, I pulled the covers off her and checked for any sign of distress. No bruises, no marks, nothing that would explain the strange stillness. I leaned in closer, listening for any signs of life, and finally heard it, a slow, rhythmic breathing. The relief was temporary. The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. Rachel had seemed so calm, too calm. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. My wife, Claire, appeared in the doorway, her tired eyes blinking in confusion. "What's going on? Why are you standing there?" I turned to face her, my voice shaking. "Something's wrong. Lucy, she's not acting like herself. She's cold, Claire. She's not reacting." Claire crossed the room quickly, kneeling beside the bed. She brushed Lucy's hair away from her face, and for a brief moment, her eyes softened. "She's just sleeping, honey. You're overreacting." But I couldn't shake the unease, the feeling that there was something off, something that didn't belong in this quiet, almost eerie calm. My heart was still pounding in my chest as I sat on the edge of Lucy's bed, staring at my daughter's still form. "You didn't notice anything strange about Rachel tonight?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Claire frowned, glancing back at me with confusion. "No. I mean, she was fine, right? We talked about the usual things when we left. She seemed nice enough. But that's just it," I thought to myself. Too nice. Too perfect. Something didn't add up. I looked at Lucy once more, willing her to open her eyes, to show me some sign that she was okay. But she didn't move, her tiny body still beneath the covers. "I'm calling her," I said, standing up abruptly. I didn't know why I hadn't done it earlier. But now, as the fear crept into my bones, I had to call Rachel. I had to hear her voice again and figure out what the hell was going on. My hands fumbled as I pulled out my phone, the screen lighting up in the darkness of Lucy's room. I dialed Rachel's number, watching as the call rang through. The phone buzzed in my ear, but Rachel didn't pick up. Instead, it went straight to voicemail after the third ring. I waited, listening to the beep. "Rachel," I said, my voice shaky. "This is Mr. Harper. I need to know if everything is okay. Lucy, she's acting strange, and I just need some reassurance. Please call me back." I hung up, but the unsettling silence that followed only heightened my anxiety. Where was she? Why wouldn't she answer? "Maybe she's just busy with other kids," Claire suggested, but I could tell she wasn't convinced either. She had seen the oddness in Lucy's demeanor, too, even if she wasn't ready to admit it yet. Minutes passed. The quietness in the room was suffocating. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 11:45 p.m. That's when the feeling turned from unsettling to downright chilling. Just as I was about to make another attempt at calling Rachel, my phone buzzed in my hand. A text message from Rachel. I opened it immediately. "Lucy's just sleeping. Don't worry, she's fine." The message was short and to the point, but something about it felt off. The sudden urgency in her tone made my skin crawl. Why was she texting me now? Why hadn't she called back? And why did her message feel so rehearsed? I stared at the text, my thoughts racing. There was something wrong with this entire situation, something I couldn't quite grasp, but I felt it deep in my gut. Something was hiding just beneath the surface. "I'm going to check on her again," I said to Claire, my voice tight with unease. She didn't argue, sensing the growing tension in the air. I turned and walked back to Lucy's room, hoping that I had simply overreacted, that everything was fine and I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew I couldn't trust my instincts anymore. I knelt beside the bed again, my hands brushing over Lucy's cheek. The coldness was still there, but this time, it was different. There was something more. Her breathing was too steady, too slow, almost mechanical. Her eyes fluttered briefly, but they didn't open. Something was off. Something wasn't right. I stood up, heart pounding in my chest, and grabbed the thermometer from the bedside table. I clicked it on, aiming to take Lucy's temperature just to reassure myself that everything was fine. But as I placed it under her arm, something else caught my eye. The pillow beneath her head was perfectly fluffed, and the sheets beneath her were undisturbed, as though no one had moved since she went to bed. It was strange. Lucy was a restless sleeper, always kicking off her covers or rolling around in the night. This stillness, it didn't belong. My hand shook as I checked the thermometer. It read normal, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, but it didn't settle my nerves. I walked to the door and turned to face Claire, my mind racing. Something was wrong, but what? What had Rachel done? The atmosphere in the house felt colder now, almost as if the very air had thickened with the weight of unanswered questions. Every corner I looked at seemed to echo with unease, the walls pressing in tighter with every passing second. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. I stood frozen in Lucy's room for a long moment, staring down at my daughter's pale face, still unable to comprehend what was happening. Claire was standing in the doorway, her expression soft but filled with confusion. "I think we should check on Rachel again," she said, her voice quiet but firm, as if she had finally come to the same conclusion I had. Something was off. I nodded without a word, still feeling a coldness in my bones that refused to let go. I pulled my phone from my pocket again, the screen lighting up in the darkness as I prepared to call Rachel for the third time. The phone rang twice, then 3 times, and then, once again, it went to voicemail. I gritted my teeth and left another message. "Rachel, please. Something isn't right. I need you to answer. Call me back immediately." The minutes that followed felt like hours. My body hummed with nervous energy as I paced in circles. Claire, too, seemed restless, her eyes darting nervously around the house, as if looking for some sign, some clue that could help us make sense of this growing dread. We both knew something was wrong, but we didn't know what. "I'm going to call a neighbor," Claire said suddenly, her face tightening with worry. She quickly dialed the number of a close friend who lived next door and stepped into the hallway to speak in private. I didn't want to be left alone in Lucy's room with the creeping sense that we were missing something obvious. As I watched Claire walk away, I found myself glancing back at Lucy one last time, looking for any change, any sign that she was still the same little girl we knew. But she was exactly the same, almost too still, too perfect. I couldn't help but wonder, had Rachel done something to her? Was she somehow involved in all of this? Suddenly, a knock at the door broke the tense silence. The sound was so unexpected, so out of place, that I froze where I stood. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was too late for anyone to be coming over, and the neighbors were supposed to be occupied. But there it was again, a soft, urgent knock. My pulse quickened, and my stomach dropped. I wasn't sure if I wanted to answer it. I quickly walked downstairs, feeling my every step echo in the empty house. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a muffled voice. "Mr. Harper? Are you there?" I stopped dead in my tracks. The voice wasn't Rachel's. It was a man's. My mind raced with possibilities, most of them dark and unsettling. I had no idea who this could be, but the way my heart pounded in my chest told me I wasn't prepared for whatever this was. I stood at the front door for a moment, trying to steady my breath, trying to decide what to do. The voice came again, now more urgent. "Mr. Harper, please. I really need to talk to you." I opened the door slowly, cautiously. Standing on the other side was a man I didn't recognize. He looked anxious, his face pale with bags under his eyes. His clothes were disheveled, as though he had been in a hurry, and he was holding a piece of paper in his hand, clenched tightly in his fist. "I'm sorry to bother you at this hour," he began, his voice shaking, "but I think I know what happened to your daughter." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I think she's in danger," he continued, glancing over his shoulder nervously as if he feared someone might be watching. You need to listen to me. You have to. I was speechless. My body was trembling as I tried to process what he was saying. My mind screamed for answers, for something. Anything that could make sense of this nightmare. Who are you? I finally managed to ask, my voice hoarse. The man hesitated, glancing over his shoulder again. He lowered his voice, as though fearing someone might hear. My name's Mark. I'm Rachel's ex-boyfriend. My heart skipped a beat. Mark stepped closer, his eyes darting around nervously, before he handed me the piece of paper he was holding. I took it from his trembling hands, unfolding it quickly. It was a photo, a blurry, grainy image of Rachel, but not the woman who had just babysat for us. This Rachel was different. Her eyes were cold, and her smile was something I couldn't quite describe. It wasn't warm, it wasn't genuine. It was menacing. I looked up at Mark, my mind racing. What is this? What's going on? He swallowed hard, looking like he might collapse at any moment. Rachel, she's not who you think she is. She's not just some sweet, innocent girl. She's got a dark history, a dangerous one. And I'm afraid she's been lying to you about who she really is. I could hardly breathe. My world was unraveling, piece by piece, and it was almost too much to bear. Tell me what you know, I demanded, my voice suddenly desperate. Mark took a deep breath and glanced over his shoulder once more before continuing. She's involved in something much bigger than you can imagine. She's been using children for something twisted. I don't know all the details, but she's been in and out of trouble for years. I tried to warn her to stay away from kids, but she wouldn't listen. She got worse. And now, his words trailed off, leaving a heavy silence in the air. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My thoughts were spinning, my mind struggling to process the reality of the situation. You need to check Lucy. Now. Mark's voice was urgent. You have to make sure she's okay. I didn't wait another second. I turned and ran up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest, the blood rushing in my ears. My legs felt weak, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't think about anything else. I had to check on Lucy. I burst into her room, breathless, and there she was, still lying under the covers, her body as still as ever. But now, my heart was racing in fear of what might be happening. My mind screamed at me to act, to check her again, to make sure she was still my daughter. But deep down, I already knew. I didn't know what I was looking for, but something inside me, something primal, was urging me to act. I couldn't just stand there. I couldn't let this go, not when the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, and every instinct in my body screamed that something wasn't right. I grabbed Lucy's wrist first, feeling the coolness of her skin under my fingertips. It was colder than it should have been. I swallowed hard, trying to control the rising panic in my chest. Her pulse, though faint, was there, but it felt so much weaker than it should have been. It was as if she was barely clinging to life. My hands trembled as I pulled back the covers, fully expecting to see some sign of her condition, some hint of what had happened. But the moment I pulled the blanket away, a chill ran down my spine. Lucy was lying there, perfectly still, but her face wasn't just pale. It was ashen, unnaturally so. I glanced quickly to her chest. Her breathing, which had been steady earlier, seemed to have slowed further, almost to the point where I thought it might stop altogether. My hands shook violently as I reached for her, trying to rouse her once again. Lucy, I whispered frantically. Lucy, wake up. Nothing. I turned to the door, and as if my feet had a mind of their own, I rushed back out into the hallway, calling for Claire. I could barely breathe as I found her standing at the top of the stairs, her eyes wide with fear. Her face told me everything I needed to know. She knew it too. Claire, something's wrong. I think she's been poisoned. My words came out in a desperate gasp, and I could hardly believe them myself, but there it was. The connection in my mind was undeniable. Rachel had to be involved somehow. There was no other explanation. My daughter, my beautiful little girl, was not herself. She was slipping away, and I didn't know why. Claire rushed into the room without a word, kneeling by Lucy's side. Her face paled when she saw what I saw, the cold, lifeless expression on our daughter's face. Claire touched her daughter's forehead, and I could see the realization flood her eyes. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice shaking. Suddenly, the floor beneath me seemed to tilt, and I had to lean against the wall to steady myself. I could hear Mark's voice in my mind, echoing with the words something twisted, and she's been using children. The more I thought about it, the more certain I was that Rachel had done something to Lucy. I wasn't just imagining this. Something horrible was happening to our family. Claire immediately reached for her phone, dialing emergency services. Her voice trembled as she spoke, trying to explain the situation. My daughter, she's unresponsive. We need help, fast. But as she spoke, a thought crossed my mind. What if it was already too late? What if Rachel had already done what she needed to do, and we were simply too late to save her? While Claire was on the phone with the dispatcher, I turned back to Lucy, unable to tear myself away. I could see her chest rise and fall in the slow, shallow rhythm of her breathing. The paramedics were on their way, but my mind was filled with a dark, ominous thought. What if Rachel had already gotten to her? What if she had already done what Mark had said, whatever dark, twisted thing she had been involved in? As the minutes stretched on, I felt the weight of the house closing in around me. Every creak of the floorboards, every passing second, seemed to heighten the feeling of something terrible lurking just out of reach. I couldn't stop thinking about Rachel's calm demeanor earlier, her steady, almost too perfect behavior. It had all seemed so innocent, so reassuring at first. But now, I saw it for what it truly was, an act. She had been playing us from the beginning, and I was too blind to see it. The doorbell rang suddenly, pulling me from my spiraling thoughts. The paramedics had arrived. Claire rushed to the door, and I remained frozen, my eyes fixed on Lucy. I couldn't look away, couldn't bring myself to leave her side, even as hope felt like it was slipping through my fingers. The paramedics were efficient, moving quickly, assessing Lucy's condition with practiced eyes. One of them, a woman with short blonde hair, looked at me as she knelt by Lucy's side, her face stern and professional. "What happened?" she asked quickly, already working to hook up an oxygen mask to Lucy's face. "She's been acting strangely for hours," I said, my voice cracking. "She was fine when we left, but when we came back, she was unresponsive. I'm not sure what happened, but I think she's been poisoned." The paramedic nodded, her eyes narrowing. "We'll take care of her. You did the right thing by calling us. We need to move quickly." They worked swiftly, starting in 4-line and monitoring her vitals. But despite their best efforts, the silence in the room was deafening. I couldn't help but wonder, what if it was too late? What if Rachel had already crossed the line too far, and Lucy couldn't be saved? After a few moments, the paramedics looked at each other, their expressions grim. One of them turned to me. "We need to get her to the hospital immediately. It looks like she's been exposed to something toxic. We're going to try everything we can, but I can't promise anything right now." A cold wave of dread washed over me as I nodded numbly, unable to process their words. Toxic? What could she have been poisoned with? And why? The paramedics hurriedly prepared Lucy for transport, and Claire, though shaken, moved with a quiet determination. She was already gathering her things, ready to rush to the hospital, but I could barely move. My mind kept returning to Rachel. The more I thought about her, the more certain I became that she was at the heart of this. Whatever had happened to Lucy, Rachel had to be involved. As the paramedics wheeled Lucy out of the house, I was left standing there, my heart heavy with guilt and fear. The worst part was knowing that Rachel was still out there. And now, I had no idea what she was capable of. We raced to the hospital, the night feeling endless, filled with a quiet desperation. Claire and I barely spoke. The weight of our fear and uncertainty hung between us, heavy and suffocating. Hours passed before we got an update. The doctors had stabilized Lucy, but there was still no definitive answer on what had caused her condition. They hadn't been able to identify the substance in her system, and that only added to the growing mystery. That's when we received the call. It wasn't from the hospital. It wasn't even from Rachel. It was from Mark. "Mr. Harper," he said urgently, "I need you to listen carefully. I've just found something. You were right. Rachel, she's been involved in something far darker than I could ever explain." I listened in silence as Mark's voice dropped to a whisper. "Rachel didn't just babysit your daughter. She's been targeting families like yours, using children as part of a ritual to gain something she's been after for a long time." My blood ran cold as he spoke. "You have to find her before it's too late." The line went dead.